Welcome to Voice of Stories. Discover tales that inspire, captivate, and bring words to life. Subscribe for unforgettable stories.
Ethan Miller stretched across his king-sized bed, the silk sheets cool against his skin as the early morning sun streamed through the sleek blinds, casting sharp shadows on the floor. He lay there for a moment, relishing the stillness, the quiet luxury of his penthouse in the heart of Chicago. Business trips had become his escape, a way to step outside the mundane life he lived in the suburbs with his wife, Claire. He'd always known he wanted more, something beyond the predictable routine. These escapes were his reward for all the hard work, his version of success. Reaching for his phone, he checked his bank balance. His smile faltered when he saw the numbers. The costs of maintaining the lifestyle he had carefully built were catching up with him. More debt, more charges from the latest trip to high-end stores with Giselle. Giselle. The thought of her brought a fleeting warmth, a spark of excitement. Unlike Claire, who was grounded and practical, Giselle was a whirlwind, young, bold, and brimming with ambition. She made him feel alive and expensive. His debts were mounting faster than he could juggle them. The loan he'd taken to impress Giselle was coming due in a few weeks, and his attempts to delay payments were starting to catch up with him. But this was what success was supposed to look like, right? His phone buzzed again. Another alert from his bank. He silenced it without hesitation. No time for that right now, he thought, glancing over at Giselle, who was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she moved around, preparing coffee in his designer kitchen. Everything in his life was a symbol of wealth. His apartment, his car, even his girlfriend. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air as he walked into the kitchen, his thoughts momentarily distracted by the joy of being with Giselle. Her golden hair shimmered in the morning light, and her smile was as radiant as the city below. "Coffee, darling?" she asked, her voice like velvet. Ethan smiled, taking the cup she handed him. The bitterness of his financial reality melted away in the presence of her warmth and the elegance of the penthouse they were in. Another rental, another financial tightrope. "Let's go shopping later, maybe," Giselle added with a playful grin. "I've seen this boutique on Michigan Avenue, you'd love it." His credit card burned in his wallet at the thought, but he smiled. "Anything for you," he said, the words smooth, practiced. He could pretend to be the successful businessman he wanted to be, if only for a few more moments. In this life, he could believe the facade, believe that he had it all. But as he watched Giselle, he knew the truth. His world was built on shaky foundations. One phone call, one late payment, and it could all come crashing down. Still, he pushed the thought aside, willing to savor the moment. Later that day, as he drove back to the suburbs, his thoughts turned dark. Claire. He hated himself for it, but he did. The more he thought about her, her stability, her self-sufficiency, the more it gnawed at him. Why couldn't she just be a little less perfect? Why did she have to be so composed, so sensible? He couldn't stand how she seemed so content, so unbothered by his constant excuses, his need to play pretend. And the worst part? She never begged him to change. She just waited. And that frustrated him more than anything. 40 years old, Ethan, he muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel. You should be acting like it. His last fight with Claire came to mind, the one where her quiet disappointment cut deeper than any angry words could have. When she'd called him out for his behavior, he'd lashed out, telling her she was too good for him. He'd tried to push her down, make her feel small, because somehow that made him feel better. Now, as he pulled into the driveway of their suburban home, a familiar emptiness filled him. The house felt cold and sterile compared to the vibrant energy of his life with Giselle. Claire's car was parked in the driveway, her sensible hybrid that she insisted on, always so practical, always so predictable. Inside, everything was quiet. Ethan scanned the kitchen counter where Claire had left a note. Working late. Dinner in the fridge. Love C. The neatness of it all irritated him. How did she manage to be so competent, so perfect. Later that evening, as he sat with a glass of whiskey in hand, his mind drifted back to the beginning of it all, his first meeting with Claire in that park, when she'd been playing violin in the summer evening. She had been struggling then, an artist with no safety net. Ethan had felt like her hero, the one to save her from that life. But now, the more he thought about it, the more he wondered, had she ever really needed him? Or was he just another stepping stone on her journey? And then there was Giselle, exciting, unpredictable Giselle. She was everything Claire wasn't. She made him feel like he was someone else, someone powerful, someone. The hiss of sizzling bacon cut through the quiet office like a warning, the smoke alarm shrieking in perfect harmony with the chaos about to unfold. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his executive chair, its leather creaking beneath him as he stared at Rachel's contact photo on his iPhone. The picture, taken at last year's corporate gala, showed her poised and composed, everything he had tried so hard to mold her into. His mouth twisted bitterly at the thought. The office around him, a cubicle surrounded by the clutter of middle management, felt stifling that morning. The fake plant in the corner had accumulated dust, and the motivational posters plastered on the wall seemed to mock him. Even the family photo he kept on his desk for appearances felt like an accusation. The city buzzed outside his window, oblivious to the emotional maelstrom unfolding within his four walls. He jabbed at the call button, the ring echoing in his skull with every passing second. "Hello?" Rachel's voice came through, calm and professional as ever. "I need to talk to you, Rachel," Marcus began, mentally preparing his speech. "I can't keep going like this. I need something more. A real family with kids. Something you can't give me." A silence followed, thick with tension. He pushed on, his tone growing colder. "I've made up my mind. I've already found someone else. She's carrying my child. I'm going to be a father." There was a long, unnerving pause. Rachel's voice, barely audible, finally broke the silence. "I understand. Come home later. We need to sort this out." Marcus hung up and immediately dialed the bank. His hands trembled slightly, unsure whether it was from excitement or dread. The call was brief but heated, ending with a personal meeting scheduled with the owner. As he prepared to leave, Lucy, his new partner, pouted from the passenger seat of the car. The summer heat made her irritable, her designer sundress clinging to her growing belly. "Be patient, sunshine," Marcus said softly, running his hand through her platinum blonde hair. "We need to finish things with Rachel. Make sure she can't touch the house. It's all for our future." But Marcus had bigger plans. Rachel's signature on the divorce papers wouldn't just free him from his marriage, it would also free him from his growing financial burden. His escape from debt would be complete. The bank's grand, imposing tower loomed ahead, the meeting with James Crawford, the owner, feeling more like a trial than a business transaction. When Marcus entered the office, the youthful man behind the mahogany desk met him with an air of quiet skepticism. "So, let me get this straight," James said, his steely gray eyes narrowing. "You're offering your wife's services to clear your debt?" "She's capable," Marcus stammered, glancing over at Rachel, who sat by his side. Her face was expressionless, her gaze fixed forward. "Mrs. Reynolds?" James addressed her coolly. "Do you understand what your husband is proposing?" Rachel's voice was emotionless, almost clinical. "Yes, I understand." James's eyes turned hard. "Follow me," he said, leading Rachel from the office, leaving Marcus to stew in his thoughts. To Marcus's surprise, the meeting didn't end in the way he expected. Instead of a cold business transaction, Rachel and James found themselves at L'Heure Den, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. As the sommelier poured them a vintage Bordeaux, James leaned in. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked, his tone casual yet probing. Rachel, caught off guard, realized she hadn't eaten in hours. By dessert, the tension between them had eased, and she found herself laughing at James's dry wit. James smiled, setting down his espresso. I have a proposition for you, Rachel. Not the one your husband suggested. I have a house on Lakeshore Drive. Plenty of room. Stay there while you figure things out. No strings attached. Rachel met his gaze, understanding perfectly the unspoken offer. She nodded, her voice soft but sincere. Thank you. Later, as James's driver loaded her bags into the car, Rachel caught a glimpse of herself in the tinted windows. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her, a woman who had finally woken up from a long, unsettling dream. A year passed, and Marcus's life was unrecognizable. Gone were his lazy mornings and the carefree attitude toward his work. Lucy, once the adoring mistress, had transformed into a demanding, controlling force. The townhouse they had bought together felt more like a prison than a home, and the mortgage payments were suffocating. Lucy's insatiable need for appearances, for more clothes, more designer bags, more expensive everything, drained Marcus in ways he couldn't explain. Their 5-month-old son, swaddled in clothes he couldn't afford, had begun to feel like an unwelcome reminder of everything Marcus had lost. One evening, as Marcus stood in the nursery, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right began to grow. His son's features were strikingly different, those dark eyes, thick eyebrows, and that shock of near-black hair against pale skin. Neither he nor Lucy had those features. The seed of doubt had taken root. A clumsy fall sent Marcus to the hospital with a compound fracture in his arm. Lucy's reaction was as dramatic as ever, a public tirade in the emergency room that left Marcus wishing for any form of escape. She ranted about how his injury would complicate their already difficult life, her words sharp and unyielding. As the morphine slowly worked its way through his system, Marcus thought about Rachel, how calm she had been during their last crisis, how competent she was when things fell apart, how much he missed her quiet efficiency. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed like a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. It was while wandering the sterile hospital corridors that Marcus saw her, Rachel. She was no longer the woman he had discarded. She was radiant, poised, and glowing with a confidence he hadn't seen in her before. And beside her stood James, his hand resting protectively on her lower back. A diamond ring caught the harsh hospital lighting, throwing off little rainbows. "Rachel," Marcus croaked, his voice cracking. Rachel glanced at him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, Marcus. I'm pregnant." Marcus stared at her, dumbfounded, his eyes tracking the subtle curve of her belly. "I hope you recover soon," she said before turning, her hand slipping into James's. They walked away, their quiet intimacy a stark contrast to Marcus's own crumbling life. Alone in his hospital room, Marcus's heart hammered in his chest as he tore open the envelope containing the paternity test results. The words blurred before his eyes as he read, his worst fears confirmed. Probability of paternity, 0%. Marcus's mind spiraled. In 3 days, he would be discharged from the hospital. In 3 days, he would return home to a child who wasn't his. He stared at his phone as it lit up with Lucy's name, probably calling to complain about another trivial matter. But Marcus couldn't bring himself to answer.